Hello, Eugene Aiello. I am sorry about that. Hopefully you guys were able to follow the link from the previous video to this video. For some reason, my phone decided to stop recording. So the next part I'm going to talk about, in that relation of quantum realism, I'm going to go out on a limb. This is kind of something I've read about and kind of the way I understand it, but we're going to talk about just reality. If everything is existing because an observer is creating that material world, we're going to start out at the very beginning. The immaterial world, lower than atoms, lower than protons and neutrons. We start getting into where they're fracturing up protons and neutrons and getting quarks and bosons, all that stuff. And I'm lost at that point. We'll say quarks and bosons might be sitting here, and then there's another question mark before that. At some point, everything is just this energy and information. That's what's creating the entire everything. Atoms are going to be created as a physical reality. So objective collapse is going to occur because there's an observation. That observation is going to be occurring because cells, protein, and microtubule interactions with those atoms. Keep in mind that those interactions are only happening because electromagnetic energy interacting with those protein networks. So those protein networks are interacting with the environment and creating the realism of an atom. Then you get to, after the atom, what is creating the recognition of an atom? Well, that gets pretty complicated. It could be just itself, that the observations and the measurements occurring within that atom are creating itself, or I'm sorry, within that cell. But the organism itself, that microtubule glial system, I'm going to call it the quantum consciousness, that energy and information which is going through a coherent wave of energy within our system, which we're going to describe coherent wave in a little bit, that's bringing a lot of reality to the situation. We're bringing reality to cells. When we look at them under a microscope, they exist. When we look at our skin, we're seeing as great a detail as we can, but we're not seeing cells individually, but as a whole, we're seeing the reality of our body. So we're creating atoms when we look at atoms under a microscope, electron microscopy. So I know it's getting pretty out there, but remember I said, if this makes sense to you, then you don't understand it. What's interesting about us being quantum conscious, we can observe the world around us, so will other animals. That's an observer. But what we've been doing that other animals can't is we're looking out at the universe. We're seeing all the different planets, all the different galaxies. We're creating that reality through our observation of it. So up top here, I've got a little bracket. We're in the physical world, matter. When you get past matter, what do we have? What's referred to as the universal consciousness. It's a flow of energy and information. What is this? We don't understand it, but that energy and information is going to go all the way back to how did these different proteins get formed? How did those atoms arrange? There was some type of information and energy that coordinated that having that quantum state, that once an observer saw it, it collapsed into that. Above that, we don't know what's above that. So kind of an offshoot. I felt that it was a fun one to do before we get into the rest of the nitty-gritties of quantum mechanics, but I like to bring it up only because that quantum consciousness of the glial system, that is basically making everything else occur. If you think about it, all matter is a point of view from the observer, and for our world and what we're seeing, we're the observer. And that's us collapsing all these different frequencies of energy down into a slower energy that we can observe. We create a reality with us slowing down those quantum interactions that are occurring. So a little bit. So I'm going to clean up this board and we're going to start talking about quantum characteristics next. The first characteristic is quantum tunneling. Quantum tunneling is when electrons can overcome a physical barrier in space and time that would be outside classical expectations. This can happen over vast amounts of space and distance in a very rapid time, meaning speed of light. So I didn't put this up here, but when an electron is traveling and it approaches a barrier, if it's in its wave function property and it's not mass at that point, it can overcome this barrier if the wavelength is long enough to pass through that barrier. When I was giving you that bowling ball example in the beginning of the last video, that should all have been one video, that bowling ball is not going to make it through the wall. But in quantum mechanics, that bowling ball, if it's in a wave function and it's exhibiting quantum properties, it can pass through that wall. Quite an amazing thought, but if you rule out the whole image that we have everything is material, in quantum levels, things aren't material. They bounce between the two states. So an electron can overcome an energetic barrier that would not be expected. Very important. Life is existing based on this quantum interaction. What I mean by that is electrons can accomplish semiconductor properties with very little energy. So when we were talking earlier about semiconductors, about how we create a voltage across it and overcoming that band gap, we don't have in our body what you would call a battery. We are creating charge separation from those pigment systems, and that charge separation is a very low voltage, but it's able to accomplish a lot when it's exciting electrons out to that orbital, and they're not escaping, because remember I talked about ionizing, non-ionizing radiation. Non-ionizing radiation is just bringing that electron to an excited level, but that electron is going to tunnel. It's going to use that ability, that quantum characteristic, to do things you wouldn't expect it to do. So a good example that we talked a lot about was the cytochromes of the mitochondria. That excited electron within that heme core, it's going to excite, but how's it getting to that oxygen? It's going into a quantum state, a wave property for that brief moment of time and transferring over to oxygen. Electron flow within protein residue cores. Mother Nature had quite the arrangement here. When I said earlier that the semiconductor nature that occurs within proteins with all the different residue combinations, quite amazing things can happen there to create semiconductor reactions, meaning emissions of biophotonic energy, movement of electrons for protein changes, structure changes. That's occurring within those electron flows within the protein residues. When we talk about semiconductors, I'm just going to bring it up just because I thought this was interesting, that when they're constructing a semiconductor for, say, an LED light, when they're doping those materials, they have to account for electron tunneling. They have to make sure that that doesn't occur, or we're going to start having things happening within that semiconductor that they don't want. So we want to stick in the classic realm of physics when we're making physical things, electronic devices. We don't want quantum interactions to kind of make the whole system go haywire. So they're making it so that a large amount of barrier has to be overcome with that voltage that they're going to apply to it. So it's not so close to that barrier that it's just going to happen on its own. It has to be controlled to have that expected outcome like classical physics likes. So we're going to move on to our next property. I'm going to re-erase the board again, so I'll be right back. The next characteristic is quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement and quantum coherence in theory are two separate quantum characteristics, but almost everything you read pretty much agrees that it's the same thing. I'm not going to get into the minute differences because quantum entanglement and quantum tunneling, which I just brought up, are going to be the most important quantum characteristics in the biophotonic system. So in quantum entanglement, if you have two quantum particles, an electron or a photon, in close relationship, they will share the same superposition. Superposition basically just means the location within that wave frequency. So A and B will be in the same location. This will happen indefinitely. If you separate these two wave functions, they will still remain in the same superposition. Now, Einstein was quoted as saying, the next part's the really spooky part. So these guys can split off indefinitely and be in completely different places in space. If you observe or you measure one of those particles, it's going to affect the other particle. They share a same sink. I'm trying to put it in words in classical physics, it's pretty tough. They're inseparable once they're joined. So if you think of the quantum system that I've been discussing, that we have these electromagnetic frequencies from those pigment systems coming into the system and integrating in the thalamus, those frequencies, every single one of those frequencies are going to have quantum entanglement and quantum coherence, which is going to be very vital to the model I'm describing, because it can cause coherence of the whole system just by the nature of entanglement. So as different things are interacting within the system, the whole system is responding at the same time. So I'm going to draw a quick little graphic on that. It's my best view of how I would explain this quantum coherent wave that I keep mentioning. That quantum coherent wave is when I'm drawing like the centrosome of the microtubule and saying that quantum coherent wave is going to be picked apart by each individual specialized cell, meaning they're going to absorb certain frequencies within that coherent wave. That frequency within their microtubule network is going to govern the information. It's going to govern the processing and the function, genetic expression, how that cell acts within the entire system. In order for multicellular life to organize all these different specialized function, this quantum coherence entanglement is going to be vital to this. Okay, here's my simplistic model of how quantum physics works within the multicellular organism. So we've discussed at great detail how the pigment systems are absorbing all of the different frequencies. They're converting solar electromagnetic energy into biophotonic frequencies, multiples. I don't even know how many. Those are integrating in the thalamus. The thalamus is integrating all of the information coming from every cell of the body, integrating all of that binary data from the nervous system, from the neurons. That information is then going to float in the coherent wave. So the thalamus is converting everything into that coherent frequency. Everything in that frequency is going to be entangled. Central glial system, the quantum consciousness, is going to have the processing within its microtubule centers. That processing has the plan. That dictates how the organism is going to function, how every cell is going to react to the different situations of information coming into the system. That coherent frequency is going to go to every cell. Frequencies are going to get absorbed very specifically by the centriole. That cell is going to also be communicating a coherent frequency back out through that sensory system back into the thalamus. This loop, I didn't describe too much in my series yet, but I believe this loop is working through the autonomic nervous system, meaning the glial cells wrapping around the parasympathetic and sympathetic nerves. This information coming through those glial cells is biophotonic information that's just coming from those microtubules. All the nearby cells around that area can receive their signals. That signal is not going to go very far within all the different tissues, just as we learned earlier with penetration depth of that epidermis, those, I think, 40 layers of keratinocytes. It's not going to penetrate far, so this coherent signal is going to be traveling through that peripheral nervous system, mainly the sympathetic nervous system, because that's wrapping around every blood vessel of our body. So as much as capillary and interaction of all the different nutrients and gas exchange has to be close to those cells to diffuse, so does this coherent wave. So what's important here? Understanding the quantum effects of tunneling and understanding the concept of a coherent wave. And again, if you understood all that, you don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know if I know what I'm talking about sometimes when I get into this topic, but that wraps up the quantum interactions. Next video series, I'm going to tie it together with a little more information about how the system at the very, how should I say, communication level is functioning. So hopefully my little video delay didn't mess people up and you followed the two different videos all into one. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you.